For Louisiana versus all y'all, Jarrett Roser here with Mark Clements of 225 Magazine, and obviously the last several years we've been doing the Tiger Pride podcast. Mark is also relatively newly engaged and reporting live from, I think, the basement of his parents' cabin or something right
No,
now.
this is like my bedroom right now. So, okay, I live in you've been in my house a couple of times. I live in a damn shack. It's not a very big house. So my now fiance, which is a recent development, is in the
Mazel
living
tov.
room. Yeah, thank you. In the living room, stuffing her bridesmaids thing. So I told her I'd ditch it for the bedroom. So this is a nice, actually homemade headboard. So please appreciate it while we do this Zoom right now.
When you started the sentence that your fiance was stuffing, I was concerned that you were going to say was stuffing her face, and realized how much more you might still have to learn about relationships. But much better ending than I feared for a second.
Not gonna lie, we did stuff our faces. We had some homemade sushi tonight.
Nice.
It was lovely. Yeah.
So big day, I think, all around Baton Rouge, obviously at the Clements house with the homemade sushi. But in terms of LSU football, we get an SEC schedule. We find out Kerry Vincent Jr. is officially opting out of his senior season and preparing for the NFL draft. And the Tigers open up fall camp for what I've been saying is a season somewhere between uncertain and unusual. So just kind of takeaways at the end of what was a really long, weird, winding Monday.
It's so weird, like this time that we're in, and we kind of talked about it a little bit, but it's like, it feels like there's some semblance of news happening almost every day. And like, I almost don't put forth the effort to like react to it because I know a lot of this is going to change in not even weeks, but probably days, if not like hours. Obviously, Kerry Vincent was kind of the big news early on. I think the second player after Neil Farrell to announce they're not playing for the season. So, I mean, my first thought was like, okay, who's going to fill his spot? And then you think back to like, is this at what point do we even start talking about who fills his spot? Because this season seems like it's it's still up in the air. And there's more names could be dropping on guys who don't want to play. So it almost seems too early to even like start breaking that kind of stuff down until we're like, I don't know, like week of kickoff, and then see where we go from there. But early, thoughts about the schedule releases, it seems to, if this all, let's just pretend it plays out and actually happens, seems to work out pretty well in LSU's favor for the most part. And Mississippi State opener, very excited to have Mike Leach as making his SEC debut in Tiger Stadium. There's a lot of fun little details about that one, and Bo Pelini making his comeback to LSU. There's a lot of fun elements to it, but yeah, it's nice to have some football news and keep your optimism a little bit high, at least for now.
Yeah, it's been a roller coaster and figures to continue to be a roller coaster. We're still about 5.5 weeks from what would be that season opener in Tiger Stadium against Mississippi State. And then from there, the schedule is go to Vanderbilt, back home against Missouri, to Florida, back home against South Carolina, Halloween at Auburn, have the traditional bye before hosting Alabama, back-to-back road games, Arkansas and A&M, and then close the season in early December against Ole Miss. What has it been like to try to plan much of anything? Because I had a conversation today with Jimmy and Julie where we talked about just kind of the frustrations of the back and forth of it. And I think that even if we found out now that we weren't having a football season, the end of the tug of war and inability to plan anything would at least be somehow comforting or beneficial, even though obviously
right,
we all ultimately want some football here sooner than later. I think the not knowing and constant changes that you referenced have been some of the biggest challenges. What has that been like for you guys as you try to plan for a fall as a team over there?
Well, I mean, so we're already at a weird, I don't want to call it disadvantage, but when you're a monthly magazine, you have to plan so far in ahead and then send the issue to the printer so far in advance already that every summer LSU typically in a normal summer, does a great job working with us to get interviews lined up early enough that our August issue, which is usually when the season's starting to get into full swing, it comes out, early August. So whenever this hit back in whenever this whole thing started in March or whatever, and we never thought it would last to this long way back then. And then as the months kept progressing, we realized like face-to-face interviews weren't going to happen. And we usually have a day we come and bring our photographers and do all that kind of stuff and I'll record the podcast episodes early. We'll get some guys in groups, whatever. We realized that wasn't going to happen. Any original photography, probably not going to happen besides stuff we shot last year at games. So just kind of going back and forth with LSU, and they're trying to work with the best they can to keep their players and coaches and their safety at a premium, obviously. And so we got a few phone call interviews here and there. Just like it was, I don't know, a week before our ship day, and so it was just kind of a mess to get that issue out. And once that was gone, that was kind of the big bulk of it, was our LSU issue. So once we got that out, but again, we're writing stories in July, early July, mid-July, for things that are happening in August, September, which obviously so much changes between now and then. We just talked about the schedule. That's just one very small thing. We talk about the personnel and whether, if the season even happens, the fans in the stands, how tailgating is going to work. There's just so many layers to it. And it's just, you're writing for so much unknown way back then. So it's been difficult, but it's, not any more difficult than anyone else's job has been. It's just kind of one of those, you just take it as it comes and try to do the best you can with it. And, like I said, every podcast episode we've done so far, we've done published interviews we had with Miles Brennan, Stingley, and Bo Pelini so far. And every week I'd start the intro and I record it right before it comes out on Tuesday morning. And it's like, here's what the latest is. But by next week, this is going to be almost irrelevant because things change so rapidly right now.
Yeah, no doubt. I know that there are stories right now that Julie and I have put together in the system for the next few coming days, kind of anticipating some things that appear like they're on the horizon, but at the same time, there's just no telling minute to minute, hour to hour, let alone day to day, what to anticipate. And so it is going to be very weird to watch from a much bigger picture in terms of what we get, if much of anything, and then getting into the details of some of that roster shakeup and how the team looks, as you mentioned with Kerry now out of the mix in that secondary is going to be interesting, and a lot can change between now and that alleged or potential week 1 against Mississippi State. But I think you and I agree that if this season happens starting in late September, and if we don't see many more opt-outs between now and then, which is certainly a big if, that this LSU team is a lot more talented and has a lot more potential than maybe some people assume when they see the mass exodus to the NFL.
Yeah, that was kind of what, again, long ago, but what our cover package was for the August issue was, the whole premise was, can LSU repeat? And it was kind of me making, not an argument that I think they will, but why it's not so silly to think that even though last season was arguably one of the greatest in college football history, they won't repeat what they did last year in terms of the numbers, on-field production, that kind of incredible season. But when you break down the roster and the guys they have coming back, and especially I think Miles Brennan is a massive piece of this, and the fact that he's not just a random new quarterback, that he is a guy who's been on campus for a long time and knows the system and that the coaches seem to trust. I think he's kind of a big focal point to that. But when you look at the roster and the amount of talent they have, and now we kind of look at the schedule, which seems to be pretty favorable overall. I mean, it's SEC only, so it's only can get so favorable. But it isn't so far-fetched to think that they'll be right back in the mix of things at the end of the season, competing for conference titles potentially in that top 4. And then once you get into that contention, anything can happen. And I think the biggest thing for them this year is not necessarily to repeat and start this dynasty of 3 straight or whatever, but I think it's just to establish themselves as being elite. And that last year wasn't just a one-hit, stars aligned, Joe Burrow carried establish yourself as one of the best up there with the Alabamas, Ohio States, Clemson's, guys who are there year after year, and kind of get to that echelon you've been hoping to get back to since 2011, I guess.
You hit on a couple pieces there. I've seen a lot of complaints, not necessarily from LSU fan base, but just fans across the SEC about how schedules have played out. And certainly with the 2 additional SEC East opponents, LSU kind of lucked out, and they get Missouri and Vanderbilt as those 2 additional opponents. But the way the schedule sets up, it's going to be an SEC only schedule, so it's going to be challenging. But for the Tigers, there's no real brutal stretch. They have that first game from Mike Leach, and then they have the Vandy and the Missouri. They get South Carolina in between Florida and Auburn. They get the bye before Alabama and then Arkansas, and then have to go to A&M and then close against Ole Miss. And so it's kind of an up and down schedule in terms of spacing out. You only have that one instance of the back-to-back road games, and for the most part, you don't have two potentially ranked teams even back-to-back at any point without a bye in between.
Right. And you get, I mean, you mentioned the start of the season, State, Vandy, and Missouri. You really get, I hate to call them a warm-up game, but you kind of get to get your feet wet a little bit before you go on the road at Florida for what's going to be your first big test of the season. So that works out nicely. I mean, I was just looking. I haven't looked at all the conference schedules, but Arkansas, man, that thing is brutal. Their schedule, they open with Georgia, Mississippi State, Auburn, Ole Miss, have a bye week, A&M, Tennessee, Florida, LSU, Missouri, and Bama. I mean, it's rough. It's rough.
That's like the schedule you make on the old NCAA video games when you get really cocky and you really got it rolling. Arkansas is claiming it's the toughest schedule in the history of college football, and I mean, very, very well, maybe so.
Speaking of, I just had to invest like $100 and something into that video game in an old Xbox 360 to get the sticks going back out. I was in fear that there'd be no college football, so I had to scratch that itch somehow. So we'll be starting an online dynasty here shortly.
My income is at a notable low for myself because of everything going on with COVID, but I still, as my old PlayStation 2 started spinning out and giving me some trouble, I immediately took to eBay to get another PlayStation 2 because I knew that there were going to be more hours and more days for me to keep playing I think I'm in like 2057, the year 2057 Dynasty.
That's impressive.
With Wyoming on 2005 that I've still got Bobby Bowden rocking with like 60 national titles.
Love it. You love to see it. I also took to eBay. I got to get the old 360 spinning. Things rough. And I don't know, I haven't figured out where you do it, but I know you can download like the modern rosters too. Like people start updating those. So I got to figure that out and try to get the current roster on NCAA 2014 and see how that rolls. But yeah, I think there'll be a lot of NCAA and a lot of Maddens being purchased this fall.
Yeah. With some of the uncertainty around the roster, obviously we don't know what's going to change between now and potentially kickoff. But you mentioned some confidence in Miles Brennan at quarterback, a guy that's been around, is put on the weight they've waited for him for a long time, has really been locked in, has the confidence and love of his teammates and coaches. And so I think we feel a confidence in what he brings to the table. Certainly the people around him in that football ops building have a lot of confidence in him. What are some areas that as this camp gets going are maybe bigger question marks to you, or bigger areas that you kind of have your focus on that you feel like need to be progressed or shored up in order for this team to have some success against, we're hoping, a 10-game SEC schedule?
Well, one of the spots that I'm going to have my eye on is to see how this whole O-line shakes out. I know there's a lot of spots they're still trying to find, put the pieces together, get your best five out there. I know, picking a center and then just trying to figure out how the rest of the line shakes out. And that's going to be such an important piece to Miles being successful or not. I mean, we saw Joe last year was protected pretty well and also moved in the pocket really well. And so I think when you look at Miles as a quarterback and you look at the basics of it, he has obviously a stacked receiving core to throw to. The first clips of Eric Gilbert, he doesn't look like a freshman at all out there. He looks like he's been on campus for 3 years. Should be a beast. And then I think
he's a creative. If we're sticking with the Madden and NCAA theme, he's a creative player.
99s across the board. He looks like a freak. I mean, I'm excited to see him play. And I think he'll get enough with the 4 different running backs they have. I think he'll get enough balance there to balance out a good rushing and passing attack. The O-line is kind of a concern, and less of a concern and more just curious how it shakes out with how good they were last year. And then defensively, I think you have a couple spots that will just be interesting to see how it shakes out. One of them being defensive end for me. TK McClendon moving over there is a name that you hear a lot, but haven't quite seen. And then some of those upperclassmen who have been on campus for a little while haven't quite made a name for themselves, but this could kind of be their year. And I think the linebackers could be really good as the starters. The depth there, I think, is kind of yet to be seen. But I think the secondary might be the best. Hard to say the best, especially now that Carey's gone. But a second-year Stingley with some of the talent he has around him, it did seem that group is going to be loaded.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to the secondary. I thought Kerry was going to be a really interesting role because of his versatility.
Yeah.
I think Mo Hampton is still going to bring a lot of that, though, and play a nice role, kind of some nickel, some safety. And if Todd Harris is back healthy, I think you have a lot of confidence in 5, 6, 7 guys in that secondary, even starting out, before you look at potentially increased roles for the youngsters in Ray Darius Jones and Elias Ricks and Jordan Tolles. But those two spots you mentioned, or two of the spots you mentioned in terms of offensive line and linebacker, have been the two spots for me all offseason. I think it would have been great to see what the spring looked like if we had gotten more from the spring. But at linebacker, you have Jabril Cox and Damone Clark, and then from there, interested to see how it shakes out. I wonder if schematically, if you start to see a lot of 5 and 6 DB personnel packages where you use Jacoby more in that hybrid type role to kind of help with some things in the box, but we'll see. Up front on defense, if Justin Thomas is what he was becoming before leaving the team in October, that helps at one end, but certainly a lot of uncertainty opposite him. And I think a lot of eyes on offense really come back to Dare Rosenthal. And if he can be the left tackle that they've hoped that he could be, the interior guys, you have Liam Shanahan, Chason Hines, Cardell Thomas hopefully takes a big step forward and can play a role for that team. And certainly some question marks there, but that left tackle is huge for any offense, and Dare Rosenthal is a guy that has all the potential in the world, but we haven't seen it reached in quite the way that they would like. But there's a lot of confidence coming from football ops that maybe he's ready to roll.
What's also interesting, especially defensively, is on one hand, so number one, we don't know exactly what Bo Pelini wants to do personnel-wise. Everyone says it's going to be more of a 4-3 base than a 3-4 like Aranda was. Whenever I spoke to him, he didn't necessarily say that. He just, maybe this is just coaches speak to not have to put it on the record or whatever. But he stressed a lot about using the guys they have and just finding their best spots of where they fit in, and not necessarily relying on our base is a 4-3, our base is a 3-4. Just kind of want to see where the guys line up and what they can do. Be really fast. Be very instinctual. Play with your instinct, whatever that word is. Play with your instincts.
I think it's instinctive, but all these sound great.
Instinct. There you go. That's a good journalist right there. And then, but you mentioned linebackers. I'm also curious to see what they do with a guy like Jacoby Stevens, who played a little bit there, a little bit at safety, and kind of use his versatility. And there's so many moving parts. And then you also, Pelini until recently hadn't got a chance to see a lot of these guys in person and get to work with them hands-on on the field. From talking to those guys, it was a lot of Zoom meetings, a lot of just reading through the playbook and trying to learn as much as you can virtually while they're all at their own respective homes. So it's a weird offseason for everyone, but you just tack on a new coach who's likely doing a new system for the whole defense. It's just kind of a little extra pressure, extra challenge for them.
It's going to be a lot of fun, we hope.
We hope, if it happens.
Yeah, you mentioned some of the interviews you've had on the early Tiger Pride episodes so far as we gear toward whatever the future holds. What else is coming up? When do we get involved in whatever can most closely resemble our routine of weekly chats and breakdowns?
Yeah, so we have Zach Von Rosenberg, our chat with him coming out this Tuesday. And then I think you and I can get back to our usual game plan. Now that we have although probably still tentative start date, we at least have a start date. And so we can plan out our, we do our thing. We preview the offense, preview the defense, go through the schedule, give our predictions, all this kind of stuff. I'm having flashbacks now to last year when you and I are going through the schedule last year, game by game, and thinking like, this team could be undefeated. And we're like, I don't want to get ahead of myself. And then we should have just gotten ahead of ourselves because of the season that unfolded. Not that we ever saw that coming, but yeah, I'm thinking in next week's time, you and I can get together for our usual thing and start previewing the season a little bit. Again, all that can change, but that's where we're going to be sitting at for now.
Yeah, I feel like we're definitely not going to get ahead of ourselves this time around, regardless, for a lot of
a lot of reasons.
But good chatting with you, man. Breaking down some of this as it stands Monday night, and we'll go from here.
Thanks for having me, Jared. We can do this more often.
There you go. He's Mark Clements, 225 Magazine, and my co-host or host or whatever for Tiger Pride podcast for the last several years, from really back when it was still datboot.com and then got picked up by 225 for Louisiana versus all y'all, Jarrett Roser.